Blog Talk Radio. Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good today. Thanks for asking. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Today on the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about Kriya Yoga as a spiritual science. We will discuss the goal of the practice as a realization that the human is an eternal spiritual being. Listen as we talk about what we do know to help us understand what we don't know. This system of traditional yoga is all about demonstration of spiritual law. Learn how to go from knowing to doing. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. So join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance, get the light in your soul, and become truly alive. So Swami, I know we want to talk this show. We want to talk about the different phases of consciousness, being asleep, being alive, and then being dead, and what are the differences of all of those. So why don't you get us started with that?
Yeah, that statement, being awake, being asleep, being alive, and being dead, is something that I have been contemplating for about the last 35 years at least. And I find that in teaching, I find that if you focus on the parts of it that we do know, so let's say, for example, we don't know what it's like to be dead, but we know what it's like to be awake and we know what it's like to be asleep. And oftentimes what I try and do is even break that down and let's look at being asleep. Let's look at the dream state. Because you're lying in bed, you're sound asleep, and you're having a dream. And whatever the content of that dream is, say for example, you dream that you're out for a bike ride with a group of people, and you go to the beach and you go to the ocean and you get on a boat. Now, in that dream, in your mind's eye, you see yourself as a separate entity. You see you as you. You see the group of people as a group of people. The boat as a boat. The ocean as the ocean. But the reality of the situation is that you're lying in bed. You're sound asleep. The term in Kriya Yoga is called Aham Brahmasmi. I am the creative principle. You are everything in that dream. And then you take that experience and you go and you bring it into the waking state, because the waking state is identical. We go through life and again we see ourselves as separate entities. We experience life as if it's something that's happening to us, because we're not identifying with the cosmic dreamer of this complex thought form we call reality. We're looking through this tiny little keyhole. And again, we just see ourselves as separate. And so trying to understand that if waking state and dream state, all we're experiencing are our own thought forms or thought forms, then it stands to reason that when we transition, that there's a good chance that what we're going to experience is going to be our own thought forms or thought forms. One of the books that I really like to try and help understand this a little bit is the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the translation by W.Y. Evans Wentz, that I found that book to be so helpful in understanding just exactly what to expect when we transition, which is, for the most part, for a lot of us, death really has become the ultimate unknown. And it really kind of opens you up so that you do start to understand that there is, if nothing else, the possibility that I could be a spiritual entity. and not just a material being.
We refer to death as the unknown. So I also think that not only do we have a feeling that it's unknown, but it is something that we're taught early on to really fear death. So I think I think for the most part, consciously, all of us don't look at death as another level of consciousness. We look at something that should be avoided at all costs.
Yeah, again, depending on what your belief system might be and how you approach your life. And that's one of the things I really like is what the Tibetans say, that until we learn how to die, we really never learn how to live. Like you said, that fear of death can be so immobilizing. And then, of course, just to cloak it with the concept of that, or the misconception that death is going to be now a chance for you to go from a mortal physical being to now an eternal spirit, is also, I think, misleading. Because the real goal of most of the scriptures that I have read and studied is for us to realize that we are eternal spiritual beings now. And in fact, if we can do it now, when we transition, it's to our advantage.
So how can we use those other states? Let's go back and talk about the dream state for a second. So you were saying that the dream state is also a state that has to do with what our thoughts are. So how can we look back at these dreams and learn from them to give us a better sense of what's going on with us internally?
Well, I think what you want to do is you want to have some sort of sense of purpose to exploring the concept. Like why do I really want to question life? Why do I want to understand myself? And again, a lot of it's going to come down to the simple fact that there is an innate drive in all of us that we want to be whole people, that we want to return to this unified state. We want to actualize the experience of being a eternal spiritual being. That's an archetype. It's a central theme that's universal to each and every one of us. And then to reverse engineer that and to look at the things that are visible and tangible to give us some clues to understanding this experience that's invisible and intangible, I found to be very beneficial as to why would I want to be spiritual? Why do I want to figure out the meaning and purpose behind this existence? And one of the reasons is that as a mortal material being, we are in the realms of suffering and decay. We are in the realms of sin, sickness, and death. This is going to end. It's got an expiration date. And so that to me is a call to action. And a lot of what you read, and especially in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and also it's mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, they say that if you do not realize that you are an eternal spiritual being while you are in the physical body during this incarnation, your chances of realizing it when you transition are improved, but for the most part, still slim to none. And that's why you really want to put some focus in on exploring this concept, understanding what is my potential, and then maybe even asking questions like, why would I want to why would I want to get rid of my identity as a mortal physical being and realign myself with an identity that is an eternal spiritual being? And the reason is because it's a better choice. There's benefit that comes with it. It's an upgrade. It's a way of improving the experience of life.
Well, it's interesting that you had said that even if we think in this incarnation that we are spiritual beings and we transition, it's still, the chances could be slim to none that we make this connection. Well, we are so ingrained to have this thought process of a return on investment. So a lot of people might think, well, then what's the point? If there's a slim chance to none that I won't have this connection, then why bother?
No, I didn't say that it was a slim chance to none. I said if you don't do it while you're in the body, which is everything that we talk about, this whole thing of apotheosis, that if you do not employ the strategies, if you do not figure out spiritual laws, if you don't understand the physics of spirituality, and you don't attune yourself to this dimension of reality that is eternal, while you're in the physical body, when you transition and your body dies, your chances of experiencing that are still slim to none. So in other words, in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, to paraphrase it, kind of tells us that when we transition, we're kind of dropped off on the basement floor of the spirit plane. And everything is going to depend on just how buoyant we are. Now, if we are dense and we are completely polarized with material limits, then we are not very buoyant. We start to sink almost immediately. We drop right out of the spiritual plane, and we move into the astral mental plane. In the book, it's called the Bardo plane. So we're in the realms of dreams, basically. And then, again, depending on how buoyant we are, we start to sink in that. And we, as we go through that, our initial experience is what they call your peaceful deities. So it's a relatively positive experience. But as you continue to sink, then you meet what's called the wrathful deities, which isn't so much fun anymore. And then as we continue to sink, we start to crave existence again, and then we find ourselves back in physical form. And that is what they call the cycle of death and rebirth. And we continue that until we have achieved what's called enlightenment. And that's why a lot of what we teach is the physics of spirituality. Working with the mind-body complex, creating this ability to elevate consciousness, to attune yourself to divine law.
Well, I think that's a great place to pause for a moment. So, listeners, we're going to hear a word from our sponsors. We'll return with you shortly. Kriya Yoga Theory 1, Human Development and the 8 Essential Stages of Kriya Yoga. This program is a comprehensive course that will help you get your arms around the science of Kriya Yoga. It provides a clear understanding of the goals and objectives behind yoga, along with the physics of spirituality. It includes the practices, supportive concepts of Kriya Yoga, and the process in human development, apotheosis, the process of the human becoming divine. A complete guide on how to become a human in the adult state. Get the light in your soul and experience the simplicity and joy of union with the divine. This course is available in live classes at the ashram or online with 8 videos or 4 CDs. Visit our website, www.ipdtransform.com, for more information. And welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So, Swami, I think what you're trying to say is kind of like what we've talked about in other previous radio shows, and that is, I think what we really need to do is need to think about what it is that we desire. I know you talked about this many times, and so if we're still longing for anything in this material world, then that's not going to get us to where we want to be for later on. We need to turn to spirit and not turn to the material world to give us what we think we need.
Yeah, and I think the question here is, why would you want to leave the physical world with all its pleasures? And the answer, too, is that from this perspective, we will see ourselves as separate, and we're going to feel like victims with a host of different circumstances, including sickness, loneliness, poverty, accidents, etc. So the benefits of, or these physical pleasures, aren't really as good as what we might think they are. And the spiritual option offers us, I think, a much better alternative. And so to answer my own question, why would I want to do that, is because I'd want to upgrade. And when we align with the Spirit, we understand a relationship with divine law. We become backed by peace, love, happiness, and goodness, for starters. We rise above the limits of mortal material reality, and we reside in an immortal, eternal, indestructible spirit. It's just a much better alternative.
Well, in the beginning of the program, in the summary, I had said that this system of traditional yoga is all about demonstration of spiritual laws. So what I did, I thought I would do some research again, and I Googled spiritual laws, and boy, there was all kinds of different interpretations and perspectives and perceptions of what people think spiritual laws are. So would you tell us, in regards to Kriya Yoga, what are spiritual laws?
To answer your question, I think the most trusted resource that you can find today for understanding spiritual laws is Mary Baker Eddy's book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. I think of all the people out there, she is the one that has really she's unboxed the miracles that Jesus performed while he was on earth. And she figured out that it wasn't something that he was dispensing as the Son of God, but that he was actually using these spiritual laws, and that the same laws that were readily available 2,000 years ago when Jesus walked on the planet are here now. And she was the one that I think, better than anybody, was able to demonstrate that. And a lot of it is with her Key to the Scriptures, is really trying to give you a better way of understanding the language or the instruction that the Bible has provided for all of these years. But it's really not until we go from knowing to doing does it really come alive. And even, say, for example, like understanding of ourselves as a eternal spiritual being has an effect on our reality. That once we have achieved this understanding that I am a reflection of divine law, that it immediately changes your reality. And that's not just wishful thinking. But again, it's something that when you employ and you experience it, there's something that has tangibility to it. It gets results. And the thing that she really focuses on is the whole thing of healing. That perfect health is a normal condition, and that sickness is an abnormal condition. and that perfect health is supported by divine law. It's backed by these principles. And so in order to change it, if we focus on our connection to the divine, then you can actually affect the change that they call healing on a physical level.
So it would stand to reason that because God is good and God is perfect, so you're saying if we can look at ourselves in the same way, that we are reflections of spirit, then we ourselves would be good and be perfect, and then that's what would dispel any type of sickness in the body?
Yeah, because sickness is not a reality. Sickness isn't a force in and of itself. Evil is not a force in the outside world that opposes spirit. Evil is the absence of spirit. It's the absence of divine law. And sickness is the same. And so when you can harmonize yourself with divine law, then of course you can dispel the sickness. And the other condition is sin, which is basically, sin means that we're polarized on either particles or waves. We're missing the mark, that we're not drawing from this indivisible unified field. And it's our relationship with the divine that produces the normal condition of perfect health, purity.
So we would have to turn towards spirit for this perfect health. And as I was saying earlier, when we turn towards the material world, say the Tylenol, if I have a headache, then that's going to keep me in sin. That's going to keep that sin in my body. It might numb the effects, but I'm still not healed. I'm not cured.
Right. And whether you realize it or not, what is giving that sin or that sickness power is our belief in it. It is taking our limited mortal mind and believing in something that is really not backed by divine law. And by doing that, though, we continue to perpetuate it as a reality. And by turning away from that, by dispelling that belief in it and believing in the goodness and the presence of divine law, you can get rid of it. And that's what they call a healing. And the nice thing about it is that has tangibility. That's something that you can apply. And that's something that's very different with regard to the concept of spirituality in general, with regard to like the New Age interpretation of being spiritual. Being spiritual is just a category that you dispatch information into, which means it no longer requires any further explanation. Anything is spiritual. People call indulgence in the world spiritual. And these are what I call the difference between, or what Mary Baker Eddy calls the difference between thoughts and ideas. That a thought is something that comes from the human, material, mortal mind. But an idea is something that is inspired by divine law, divine principle. It is backed by truth. And to know the truth, we must be in harmony with divine law seeking expression. And so that's the whole thing is that when we are in harmony with divine law, then we experience perfect health. And when there's discord, then of course it's the abnormal condition that can produce disease or disease.
Well, I did see in my research, and there is a quote or two that I wanted to ask you about, and one of them says, spiritual law is tightly linked to God's will and to truth. So it kind of sounds like that's what you're saying.
Right. And that's exactly what becoming spiritual is all about, is giving up personal interest, personal desire, and attuning ourselves to the will of the divine. The Lord's Prayer, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
And then I see a quote here too that Jesus had said, and this is found in John 14:6. And Jesus says, there is only one way to God. Now, I've heard you say the same thing, that there's only one way that this goes right, and 1.5 million other ways that this goes wrong. So it sounds like you say, harmonizing ourselves with the divine law is really where we need to go in order to exercise God's will.
Yeah, and that's true, that there's only one God, there's only one truth, there's only one religion, there's only one yoga, there's only one number one need. And to attune ourselves to that is the secret of life. The whole concept of putting God first. To love the Lord thy God with your heart, your soul, and your mind, or, as the Buddha said, to desire nothing.
And that brings us back to what we were talking about before, and we mean nothing as in the void. We don't want to desire those material things. Desire the new dress in the window or desire the chocolate ice cream. We want to desire nothing.
Yeah, and that basically puts us in a different perspective. Only it's an advantage. And from that perspective, this relationship that we have with the divine, this harmony that we produce, that we are now in tandem with something that's pure, it's powerful, it's sacred, that has effect on our reality. And that, to me, is what demonstrating divine law is all about. And you put yourself in a position of strength at all times, because you're no longer the victim anymore. But you're also not the sole creator of your reality either. That you are a spiritual being. You are a reflection of God, made in the image and likeness of divine principle.
So you were just reminding me too what you had said earlier, the difference between having a thought and having an idea. So if we turn ourselves towards the spirit, toward this divine law, then we can assume that we'll be given these ideas directly from spirit to help us go through our physical incarnations.
And that's one of the benefits, that having this constant inspiration, divine inspiration, to enrich everything that you do in the physical world.
Well, I guess it's about that time that we should start closing down our program. So listeners, I invite you to visit our website. It's www.ipdtransform.com. So once you're there, you can post comments about this show or give us ideas for future shows. And also, be sure to tune in to our Facebook page. You can, on Wednesday nights at 5 o'clock, we do a Facebook Live, so be sure you tune in to that. And be sure to tune in next week. We'll have another great show for you. So, Swami, do you have any other final thoughts or comments about today's show?
Well, I would like to encourage everybody to think about the title of this show, being awake, being asleep, being alive, and being dead, that there's no difference. And hopefully that will dispel any kind of fears that we may have about the expiration of this particular incarnation, and maybe encourage us to align with the simple fact that we are eternal spiritual beings, always in the presence of divine law. And with that, I'll wish everybody a good day. Namaste.
And thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.